Welcome to another episode of TERF Talk Down Under. I'm Stassja and this is Ange.
Hi.
G'day, g'day. I've got to say I'm really not very prepared this week. I've had a shit week. I've just been feeling really flat, really burnt out. I just want this whole disgusting episode of history to be over and done with.
Well, I'm afraid it's not. And I feel a bit the same way. You know, we've come back from a few weeks where we've had some actual in-life direct action. We've had interactions with other activists. We've made some positive impacts on the discourse here in Australia. And now we're back to our normal lives and our sort of relatively mundane existence. And the media and all the trans activists and everyone else are completely unchanged and going on about their usual campaign of disinformation. And we're just here, they're going, well, what have we just been through? Why have we put ourselves through this when they're just going to bullshit us and keep gaslighting? So I understand. And I quite often feel the same way.
Yeah. It's just the insanity of it all. I just, you know, I want a bloody ABC Four Corners special on the transing of children. I want, as Graham Linehan often says, where are the adults in the room? I want the adults to come out and speak out against this. This is so stupid.
I think it's coming. When I watch what's happening in the UK, and I go into and have a look on Twitter at who's following me and who's following some of the other more prominent Australian voices on this issue. Not that I'm calling myself prominent, but I am. And I noticed that there are journalists, there are people with relative influence that are paying attention. And that's the beginning. That is the beginning. And I'm heartened by what's happening in the US with Leah Thomas, that people are peak transing, you know, themselves. They're just looking at what's happening and going, no, this is wrong. And I'm also heartened by what's happening in the UK, the support for people like Maya Forstater with her trial going back at the moment, and people like that. And it's only a matter of time before it starts to happen in Australia. Like, if a lefty like me can go on Sky News to talk about this issue and not get completely denounced by the left, because if they're talking about me, I'm not hearing it because they might have actually watched it. If that can happen, then it's only a matter of time before people, on our side of politics start to want to talk about this, at least, and we've noticed, I think you've also noticed that some journalists are being more nuanced. It's not so, not like the ABC and SBS are just a full-on assault of trans voices, but some of the other mainstream media is starting to show a little bit of balance.
Yeah. With the Leah Thomas thing that you mentioned, I just watched a clip this morning posted by Coach Linda Blade.
Oh, yeah.
Where she's gone to one of the swim meets and she stood up in the stand as Leah Thomas is walking out, and she's yelled out, "You're a cheat! You're a cheat!"
Yeah. That's what we do. Yeah.
There's also a big TERF happening over in the US at the moment. Posey Parker has flown over from the UK. There's a great picture of a whole group of them. Karydn was in there. Jessica, I think her surname's Gonzalez, who runs TERF Collective. So it looks like they're having a great time, like we had in Brisbane. Yeah.
And something I did notice about that, that's put the whitest woman in the UK, Posey Keely J, is in the middle of it. But, it's a real multicultural and, diverse group of women. TERFs have this reputation of being white feminists. But when you actually get a group of women together who are invested in this, you quite often find people from a lot of different backgrounds. They might not always have equal opportunity to get their voice across, because it seems to be, particularly in our country, that, a particular kind of woman has more opportunity to discuss this issue, young, attractive, all that stuff, than others. But, generally, this affects all women, and all women are represented. And that's why it's so important to meet people in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when we come together in real life and we're all represented, and the collective energy of all that, it's really positive.
Yeah, I really felt that up in Brisbane, and I think we should talk up Brisbane a bit more, because we sort of got carried away with all the IWD protest last week, but Brisbane was excellent. And like you said, there's such a broad range of women there, lesbian women, straight women, mothers, not mothers, and
young and old.
Yeah, young and old. Yeah. Kit Kowalski, her presentation was excellent on
Jaw-dropping.
On ACON and ACON's infiltration into organisations. I was really proud of Jasmine for telling her story about what happened with the frickin' Australian Breastfeeding Association. That was great.
Yeah.
We're going to have to get her back on to talk about that. But then there were other presentations that weren't focused on the gender ideology stuff, and it's like, that's when it gets real. It's like, these are the real issues that women like us should be focusing on, and instead we're having to define what a woman is again.
Because the definition of what a man is affects domestic violence. It affects all the other issues, hospital admissions. It affects absolutely everything. So we're all distracted by this issue because of their flow-on impacts, but we're all busy screaming about the gender stuff. And we're in a domestic violence epidemic. There's no mental health services for anyone, and the few there are for young people are all putting them on the trans train. Homelessness, particularly for older women, is at an all-time high. Women from culturally diverse backgrounds are more disadvantaged regarding all of those things than other women. There's problems in the hospital system with women being pathologized, and the lack of resources into things like menopause and other things. These are all issues that affect women that are impacted by gender ideology, but we're all so distracted with trying to keep men out of our services that all these issues have gone back into the background and underground, and lesbian issues, lesbian visibility, raising young women to believe it's okay to be a woman who is attracted to women. These are all such important issues to women, and the freaking men have distracted us. But it's good when we meet in real life, these not really background, but these foreground issues that have been suppressed, they come forward, they flow naturally, because all of us are invested in this, because we've had some experience of these things, because we are born women.
Yep, absolutely. You said it impacting culturally diverse women. There was a really good presentation by Yasmin, whose surname I've forgotten, up in Brisbane, and she talked about Indian women, or Southeast Asian women, experiencing like coercive control and domestic violence, not just from their husbands, but from their in-laws. So like the mother-in-law is often one of the worst perpetrators, it seemed, from what she was saying around controlling what Indian women do. That was really shocking. And like when I was in a long-term relationship for 7 years, I had serious issues with his family, but it wasn't like that. Like being trapped, being told what to do, like you go into your room now and you stay in there and don't come out, and controlling food, controlling money, like just insane.
See, this is the thing that men's rights activists don't get, that they're like, but women do it too. We are well aware of that. A lot of us have been victims of of females perpetrating coercive control and violence. A lot of us have had shitty mothers, you know, things like that. So it's really not fair to say that we don't understand that women are also perpetrators. And particularly with this trans debate, that it's the Munchausen's parents and it's the women who identify as non-binary who are opening the doors for men to perpetrate abuse and invade our spaces against us. We are being betrayed by other women. And as feminists, we do acknowledge that. But, you know, we get it thrown at us and used and weaponized against us rather than allowing us to explain the structural impacts on women that force them to behave in that way in a patriarchy, because it's all linked. And for myself personally, like I experienced domestic violence at the hands of my mother growing up, not my father. And my father was neglectful in other ways, you know, with, you know, not having firm boundaries and to protect me from others and other things. But, you know, the main perpetrator was my mother. It's very difficult for people to engage with me about that because they don't want to admit that women are violent. And, you know, but I said, if I said, you know, that I was going to start a drinking game, because I'm trying not to say, you know, all the time. I'm really trying. I'm trying to self-hypnotize to not say, you know, because it's such an Aussie thing to do when you get stuck for words to go, you know. So if I hear it, yeah, so yeah, my mother was, you know, a domestic violence perpetrator. And when I discovered radical feminism when I was like 19, I was also studying sociology, and I did not understand why my mum was the way that she was until those two things made me realize the structural impacts on women in patriarchy and what they actually do to women. I didn't understand. And feminism's given me an opportunity to understand my mother's role and my role and the role of the men in her life that let her down in order to, you know, her to become, you know, like a man, like the one that everyone was afraid of, you know. So it's been really, really interesting. And for people who have experienced trauma, feminism makes sense of it, you know, radical feminism, not liberal feminism, obviously, but it makes sense of this stuff. And, you know, if you can understand the structural impacts on people, we live in a highly individualized society at the moment where it's all me, and there's an illusion that people are like able to self-actualize, and that if they just dream it, it can happen. You know, through TikTok and Tinder and whatever, and all these, you know, millionaires on YouTube, which we will never be, but yeah, you know, there's this illusion of self-actualization, but you know, that just completely dismisses all the structural impacts that occur on every individual on this planet. It's like there's this big cover up that they actually exist, and we are talking about, you know, the invisible oppressions like poverty. And you know, whether you're male or female, and you know, there's all of the you know, class, race, you name it. You know, I've run out of words and I've said, you know, there you go. Oh God, how did I get on here?
Yeah, I think women need feminism. I really wish. I wish for starters that the history of women's rights was taught in schools.
It used to be. So it was when I went to university. It was taught first year
at uni. I'm talking about high school. I think there needs to be a subject on it in high school. And I also think that girls need to be taught the red flags in relationships that they're in, potentially what could be a really dangerous relationship. I think that would be so useful.
But they're taught sex work is work, and that porn's normal, and they're taught how to have anal sex in you know, year 10, and they're not taught any of this stuff.
It's just gone so backwards. I'm astounded.
There's a denial too among parents about the influence of peers and things. I don't think most parents are really aware of what their children are watching on TikTok and YouTube and Twitter. You know, I was shocked when I went back to Twitter a couple of years ago and saw all the pornography that was just one click away, because I've got porn blockers on all my accounts here at home because I've got children. And, you know, because I get followed by a lot of nutbags and trans activists and incels, you know, quite often I go and have a look at what they're following. And, you know, one click away and it's XXX rated, like from, you know, close-ups of some really horrendous stuff. Now, if I can access that when I'm not expecting to, what are kids accessing when they're opening all these different tabs and pop-ups? So, you know, it really pays to get into your kids' phones and iPads and things and have a look. And also talk to your kids. Don't be afraid to talk about sex and sexuality and you know, this stupid gender thing and you know, and introduce them to people, you know, who've had lived experiences of some of these things.
You've had some adventures on Twitter this week.
Oh, well, yeah, one of the reasons I'm feeling a bit flat is I've got an AGP following me in my comments, and he was saying some really vile and disgusting things about his ex-wife, who I know through Twitter, you know, I've spoken to privately, and she's really lovely, actually. And they've been divorced for over 10 years, and she's a trans widow. And he's been following people in my comments and arguing with people, because I don't argue with them. And the other day he started, without any prompting, publishing details of his sex life with his ex-wife in graphic detail on my comments thread. And that really creeped me out. Now, I've already got prominent AGPs following me on Twitter. They've got like 30 something followers and people following, and I'm one of them. And I go through their follows, and it's pornography, and 5 TERFs. So I'm already a bit about the kind of blokes that are stalking my Twitter. But then this guy comes in, and it's like, it was, you know, it's traumatizing. It's just like opening up your inbox and getting a dick pic. It's just like, ooh, you know. So I've just been feeling really grossed out about, you know, these autogynephiles who are openly behaving in a disgusting way in a public forum, and nobody's calling them out. And yet it's like, oh, trans women are women. No woman would ever speak about a former partner like that, the way that this man spoke. Now, I screenshotted it, and I hope like hell she's got an IVO on him, because I know she used to have one. And if she has, then he's screwed. And I will walk to her house in another state and go to court with her if I could, because he's a monster. He is an absolute monster, and he's following me, you know, because I'm a TERF, and I will not accept he is female.
It's all about violating boundaries for these men, isn't it? Like, just
they love making us uncomfortable. They love it.
Yeah.
It's all about porn, kind of yucky, not sex with intimacy. It's all about like a pornographied version of what a woman is. They are revolting, absolutely revolting.
Our guest today has arrived, so I'm going to...
Oh, good, something a bit cheerful.
We've got Karydn Lisignoli joining.
Ooh, fabulous.
You probably remember her name from about 3 weeks ago.
Hi.
Hey, how are you going? Welcome.
Hi, Karyn.
Welcome. Let me see. Am I in too much dark here or not? No,
you're good.
I think it looks good, yeah. Now, Karyn, you were briefly CEO of Girl Guides WA.
Yes.
Tell us what happened.
Okay, well, I was employed by Girl Guides WA as a change agent. So as like a lot of people, you would probably be aware, those kind of old club style volunteer type programs have been going down in numbers and popularity for a very, very long time. That's been happening at Girl Guides WA. So I'm got 12 years experience as a CEO in the civic sector. The thing that I'm really good on doing is creating change, is coming in and developing a really strong values-based culture and really great program delivery, and then growing an organisation. And that's what I was brought in to do at Girl Guides. They had invested very heavily in a very extensive organisational review, which had made a whole pile of recommendations. Within the first 9 days, I had already made a great deal of changes to those recommendations, including what the staffing structure was going to be, what the salaries were, what the job descriptions, etc. And then On the 10th day, I reached out to Karyn Deves, who's the co-founder, who's a human rights lawyer and also a co-founder of Save Women's Sports. Australasia? I'm not certain. Anyway,
yep.
Australasia, yeah, because I'm pretty certain it includes New Zealand as well too. So I reached out to Karyn. I've been following her for a while. I could see that she was a woman of influence. I could see that she would be a great strategic partner long term in order to address the issue in girl guiding, which is what I'd realised that in girl guiding, they'd capitulated to this radical trans ideology where they had replaced biological sex with gender identity. And so I reached out to her via Twitter to develop a connection and a relationship with her. I think we could, there is a certain amount of legitimacy in the argument that perhaps it was slightly clumsy to do that via social media, but the reason why I did was because as a CEO in the charitable sector, when you approach people, particularly lawyers for some of those type of partnerships and pro bono support, etc., they get so many, it's just outrageous. Whereas with social media, if you've got a contact with someone with social media, then you can start developing a relationship and then you're more likely to, in order to get that partnership. So anyway, so I reached out to Karyn to say, hi, this is who I am. So she could then check me out and can we, develop a relationship in private to start looking at this issue, etc., which is what happened. But unfortunately, a very small online newspaper here called Out in Perth saw this, then approached myself, the chairperson, the commissioner, and also the federal chairperson and commissioner to get some type of response to this. And fundamentally, in a nutshell, they did what always happens as soon as they feel that a mob is coming after them, even if it's not even a mob, it's just one tiny little newspaper. And they capitulated and they folded. So when I tried to tell them, look, this is just a storm in a teacup, nothing will happen, we just write it out. We need to look at this obviously huge human rights issue impacting on young girls by this radical trans agenda. I wasn't wanting to introduce that yet. I was planning to do it, further down the track, but, it's come to a fore, let's do it now. But unfortunately, they just capitulated and they sacked me. And as was the case, there was absolutely no traction from that article at all. So yeah, so that's kind of it in a nutshell, and it's rather ironic because when I replied to some of the questions from Out in Perth, I was very tempted to say to them, you do realise that there is a growing contingent of people within your community that are also pushing back against this radical trans agenda, hence the reason why we're getting all these LGB alliances set up, because what's been happening under the name of trans ideology is fundamentally, as it's being driven, is fundamentally undermining women's rights. It's not just sexist. I very rarely use the word misogyny. I prefer to hold on to that very strict definition that misogyny is the hatred of women. Sexism is sexism, lower expectations of a particular sex. But misogyny is literally hatred of women. And what we can see is happening with this agenda, it is deeply, deeply misogynistic, and it's deeply, deeply homophobic. It's deeply illiberal. It's anti-human. It's anti-humane. And I think it's one of the biggest human rights issues that we're facing in our world at present. Yes. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, did you have any parents of girls that were in Girl Guides reach out to you when all this was happening?
Well, so when this originally happened, I mean, like it was day 10 of me being in the organisation. So I didn't get anything at that stage. Once it then went to the media and it went to the Australian, and it just got, I mean, like well over 800 comments on the Australian and on lots of multiple media. It went all kind of around the world. So I've had parents and I've had girl guiding leaders from around Australia contact me privately to thank me for having the courage to stand up and to do this, and to talk about how the environment where they are is also this kind of like quite threatening environment. This is just taken as a fait accompli, and people feel very concerned about speaking out. So yes.
Did you follow what happened in the UK girls guides with that?
Yeah, well, I've been following this for a long time, and I'll hold my hand up for my own ignorance here. I've been so watching what's been happening overseas. I hadn't realized, I knew that it would be happening here. I just didn't realize how far the laws and the rules, etc., had progressed in Australia as well too. So that fundamentally we've got exactly the same situation over here as we do have over in the rest of the world. So yes, I'd obviously seen what had been happening in Girl Guiding's UK. Yes, and it was really interesting because on the actual last day before I was TERFed out the door, I did kind of get an opportunity to kind of explain myself, which wasn't a real conversation, because when this came out in the day, when I contacted my commissioner, my chairperson, they both just kind of, I just said, look, this is it, will you support me? And I just got, no, this is really serious, Karyn, this is really serious. And I had no support. So then I just got a text message saying, we're coming in to see you at 4 o'clock. I literally had my little cardboard box with my stuff packed in it by 4 o'clock, because it was pretty obvious. I'd sent them multiple messages, requested their support, and got absolutely nothing back. So it was fairly obvious where the writing was on the wall. So I've just completely forgotten where I was going with this. Oh, right. So then at that stage, when they kind of said to me, well, at least help us understand what's going on, it was really interesting. They had no understanding of what was happening in the trans agenda. They did not have any idea what autogynephilia is and how they're sexual predators. And worse, they had no idea what was happening in the UK.
Oh,
and
wow.
so, I don't know whether you're probably not familiar with the structure. So I keep referring to a chairperson and a commissioner. So how Girl Guides work, it's like any incorporated organisation. It has a board of volunteers at the top, which has a chairperson. Then, of course, you have your CEO and your staff. So that's the governance structure. But because Girl Guides is such a massive volunteer organisation, what it also has is a position and volunteer roles on the side here, which look after guiding. So you've got a commissioner, you've got assistant commissioners, you've got regional managers, and then you've got unit leaders, right? So that's kind of the whole volunteer structure. That's all set out of Girl Guiding's UK, and that's how then Girl Guiding all across the world is kind of the same within parameters. And that commissioner and some of those other people may sit on the boards, but that commissioner obviously is a high profile person in their own right. So you've kind of got the chairperson who really looks after the governance, and your commissioner who looks after the guiding, right? And so that's why both of them are approached. So it was the commissioner who said she had no idea what had been happening in the UK. And as you know, this has been going on for several years over there. And she had no idea of it. But then, of course, she's just listening to the official correspondence that's coming out. And funnily enough, in their official correspondence, they're not saying, hi, we've got all these problems with having, our unit leaders questioning our policy in regards to gender ideology, etc. Of course, they were all just saying everything's wonderful, everything's wonderful, everything's wonderful. So, yeah, they're just blissfully unaware. And this is the reason why I ended up taking this public and taking it to the Australian, because I thought people don't know what's happening. All of these changes that's been happening within our culture, etc. There's been this a very aggressive agenda done under the social justice principle, which is anything but social justice. And it's been undermining our rights, and has been developing and putting in place policies and procedures that actually make it worse for the actual community we're trying to support. And I'm well aware of this. I've worked in the civic sector for well over 20 years, 12 as a CEO. I've seen these policies in actions, whether it comes to do with Aboriginal affairs, whether it's to do with, a lot of other women's issues, whether it's to do with homeless issues and all this sort of stuff. And then, of course, now the trans agenda is the one that's just exploded. And so I've been very concerned about this for a very long time. And I just think people don't know what's going on. People are quite rightly just trying to live a good life, have their family, have their jobs, friends, life, social interests, etc. And all these changes are coming in that no one's got any idea of, until we suddenly wake up and go, hang on, why have we got a man winning all these female sporting events and we're supposed to applaud them? How did girl dick become part of the vocabulary? How did we ever think that mutilating children was okay? That if a child presents perhaps with an issue called body dysphoria, which we know in 70 to 90% of cases goes away by itself. It's just part of that normal growing up process. And for many of those kids, it's part of them just coming to terms with their sexuality. We know that 70 to 80%, sometimes 90% will come out okay and be okay and happy in their skin. And yet we're deciding to literally mutilate those children on the basis they may be one of the maybe 5-10% that do want to transition. I mean, if you took your child to a doctor, or you took yourself to the doctor and you said, I've got a sore leg, doc, and the doc said, look, 90% of cases, it's just a strained muscle, it'll be okay. 5 to 10% of cases, we need to amputate, right? So how about we amputate now? You would think they were insane. You would be flying out of that doctor's surgery in no time. Yet this is what we're doing. And people have no idea, because people just get these small messages, right? And these messages get us to challenge reality and to deny reality. And it starts off with just a slight drip feed. And then all of a sudden it ends up where we've got to now. It starts off with people who are transgender, etc., need love and respect and support. Of course, no one's going to question that. It then comes to, well, hang on, some of these people want to live as the opposite sex. Okay, sure, if you want to present as a woman and you kind of want to walk around and dress like that, fine, that's okay. It then becomes trans women are women, and we all go, well, okay, let's be nice, let's be kind, you're a woman. And we don't think through what that means, because we're bashed around the head with this is kind, this is compassionate. But it's not kind and compassionate to deny reality. It's not kind and compassionate to feel people's delusions. And it's certainly not kind and compassionate to basically undermine the rights of the majority to support a very, very small minority. And of course, when it comes to trans issues, what is happening in terms of the safeguarding is this is not just about people with genuine body dysphoria, people with genuine transsexualism. There is a whole pile of other people who get lumped in with that, including a number of cross-dressing predatory men who may or may not be autogynephiles, but who were just effectively predators, and a whole pile within that. Because again, not everyone with autogynephilia is a predator. Not every predator has got autogynephilia, but I'm seeing now more and more research about, serial killers and people who, a lot of mass murderers and stuff, and how often they also were cross-dressers and all this sort of stuff. So there's all of this lumped into this label of trans, which then is used as this bludgeon to undermine people's rights, without people really understanding what's going on. As I said, it's a slippery slope. It starts here, and then it's a very slippery slope, and suddenly, bang, as you say, we're in the situation that we're in now, which is just diabolical. I mean, it still breaks my heart and enrages me, but it breaks my heart when I think about these women in jail. How did we ever get to a point where a man can rape a woman and then say, oh, I'm a woman? And then we'll just call them a woman. We'll make that woman who's just been sexually abused have to address her abuser as she, as her, and then get them incarcerated with them. I mean, it's such a reversal of all the liberal, democratic and compassionate and humanistic principles that we've been following for so long to build these wonderful, healthy democracies, liberal democracies that we live in. And we're literally swinging back the other way. I mean, it's staggering, and people just don't know. And then when they do find out, it's almost like a little bit like, oh, that's too hard, that's all too difficult, or maybe that isn't going to impact on me, it's not impacting on me or my children or whatever, etc., etc. So yeah, that's, like I said, I think it's really diabolical, and I think that it's time the community know about this. And when you've got a major girls development organisation like Girl Guidings, which is by definition an exclusionary service, it excludes boys, it excludes males, and that's okay. And even they capitulate to this ideology. I think that then, you know, I think people would be really, really surprised to discover that. And they were, hence the reason why there was such a outpouring of support.
Do you have self-ID in Western Australia already?
We do, yes, we have it. So we've got the same system that we've got all across the world, that we've kind of got, we've got, you know, an Equality Act, which clearly refers to biological women or gender reassigned persons who have had full transition, etc., aka on their genitals, etc., are those who are classified as women. But then we have self-ID recognised in other acts, such as in the court, such in the you know, the judiciary system, etc. So in the jail, incarceration, etc., and in regards to sports and all those other things as well. And this is what happens all the time with governments, is we've got this safety legislation, but they can literally bring in other legislation which undermines that. It happens all the time, but the only way that we can know about that, or that can be addressed, is if some poor person who that lands on then has the courage and the financial resources to take this all the way through the court system in order to realise that, hang on, this law here is fundamentally unjust. But sadly in WA, we are reviewing the Equal Opportunity Act, and they are looking to make the self-ID in there. I mean, it just beggars belief. And first of all, let's just ask the question. If you seriously think you're a woman, let's be real. How do you think you're a woman and you want to keep one of the most defining things about your masculinity intact?
Yeah. We've been swamped since, because we were, you know, in Victoria, we've got like the harshest laws. Well, us in Canada are the harshest in the world. And because we were shut down in lockdown for so long, we've come out of lockdown and we're meeting up in real life again. And all our crisis services are full of males self-identifying into rape crisis centres, AA meetings, homelessness, like women's homelessness housing, placed in, you know, women who are vulnerable women placed in crisis housing with women only, and there'll be a man in the flat. And I spoke to a woman on Twitter. The man is prostituting himself within the homeless service. The authorities know about it. And these are women escaping from domestic violence and prostitution who found out themselves in this service. And it is like a plague of autogynephiles, and they are clearly autogynephiles, self-identifying into women-only crisis services. And I'm screaming about it to anyone who will hear, on all sorts of pages on social media, on the ABC, on SBS, and nobody is talking to me. I've been in the room with these women, walked into a room with a woman who is in very, very poor mental health and in distress, walked into a women-only support service and seen a man in the room. I've been there, and nobody's asking me questions. Now, as a survivor of all sorts of horrendous things, that's quite re-traumatizing for me. And that's why I'm so freaking angry, because I've spent my whole life, I've dedicated my life to trying to help other women avoid the awful things that happen to me. And here I am trying to provide support to vulnerable women and use the agency that I have clawed back for myself to walk into a room and see the people who have done this to us centered in that room. Why are no news agencies, and why isn't every feminist in the country grabbing onto this and not even listening to me, but going into these services and saying, do you admit men? And they all go, yeah, but they're women. You know, why aren't people freaking screaming about it? And the thing that I've noticed as you were talking, and I've noticed about so many of our guests, you know, these aren't, you know, the women that are being cancelled, they're not, you know, they're not extremists. They are dynamic, mostly attractive, mostly well-spoken, highly educated, worldly and experienced women who are being no platformed and told to shut up. And if if they are being no platformed and told to shut up, what about all these voiceless women? What about these traumatized, voiceless, pathologized, deeply shattered women? What about them? So thank you for speaking up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And yes, I mean, I've worked in the civic sector my entire life because I'm genuinely concerned about social justice and making the world, trying to do my bit to create a world where we can all thrive. And I'll be honest, I stopped calling myself a feminist a long time ago. I really thought we've got there. Yes, there's isolated amounts of sexism everywhere. Of course, there's always going to be there. Yes, by women, by definition of our biology, we're always going to be physically weaker than men and therefore vulnerable for that. But fundamentally, I believe that we've got a community that supports women, that is as offended by sexual violence and abuse of women as women are, etc., that we've got these protections. And then, as I said, again, this kind of critical social justice, this stripping down of nuance, it's been making its way through our institutions. I mean, I was one of them. I came out of uni, I'm a screaming social justice sister, social justice warrior, fight the system, fight the system. I got into the civic sector and within weeks was able to go, hang on, this clashes with reality, there's much more nuance here, etc. And so I've been pushing back against it in all areas for a long time, and have found how isolating that is. And then, as I said, it's just come to the most explosive head with this. And I was thinking about it this morning when I was walking, and I just thought, males and females are different. We know that. And we know that, again, we've got more similarity than differences, etc. But it's like with all of these things, it's at the edges and it's at the extreme of that normal distribution curve where you really get to see the kind of differences between us. And when women think of men, let's be real that we've got certain stereotypes that we have about them, which are diminishing, what's the word I'm looking for? Undermining, you know what I mean? Men are hopeless, men are this, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And there's a certain attitude, there's certain stereotypes that some men have about women. And I think that because that fundamental, where there is truth in this, there is a certain amount of truth in this, that fundamentally and generally women are more drawn to connection and people and emotion and closeness, and men are more drawn to things and tasks, etc., right? Hence the reason why men get drawn more into engineering and women get drawn more into teaching and counselling and support services, you know. But what that does mean is that there is kind of within that, and this is where the previous and historical sexism came from and is still there, that because women are more drawn to nurturing and caring, and men are more drawn to tasks and things, that it's easy to see then the men as the intelligent, non-emotional, rational ones, whereas women are emotional and irrational. You know what I mean? And I think that's why, because I kept thinking for this, like, excuse me swearing, but I just want to say, how the hell did we get to the point where literally the rights of one man override the rights of all these women? And I think it's because there's that, it's very easy for that stereotype, sexist stereotype to come out, so that we do then easily go, oh, it's just the women being emotional, it's just the women being over the top. This is actually rational, this is actual logical. And it's like people can fall into that default, and we unhook from using our brains. We just kind of go with what's easy, and we know that neuroscience shows that our brains are basically fundamentally lazy. They're also hardwired for fear, they're hardwired for tribalism, they're hardwired for very simplistic black and white thinking. And so I think that that's why it's really easy, once we've been pumped with these messages for so long, And it's also then been underpinned by this culture of, well, if you push back against any of this, then you're unkind, you're lacking compassion, you're not progressive, you're an awful, unkind person. So it's created, all of this has created an environment where people will just go with what's easiest. Oh yeah, okay, whatever. Yeah, whatever. And then when it comes to this, it comes back down to, I think, basic lazy amygdala primal thinking, and it's not then again in what humans tend to do as well too, is we tend to wait until everything's really against the wall and we suddenly go, oh, whoa, okay, oh shit, okay, maybe we need to do a little bit, we need to do something about this.
I think also there's this inherent homophobia about saying, well, because this man wears a dress and makeup, he's no longer a man. I think it threatens men's masculinity on some level, to have men dressing up like women. And so rather than seeing them as a subset of men, it's like, oh no, they must be women. I think that's this baseline homophobia running through transgenderism as well.
And it's really interesting because, I mean, that's obviously how it's playing out. It's like, okay, you're a slightly feminine boy, therefore you must be a girl. You're a slightly masculine girl, therefore you must be a boy, right? And obviously then if those kids are gay, that is definitely homophobic. But I find that so interesting because, like, again, homophobia was something I thought that had just disappeared a long time ago. We're all so comfortable now with homosexuals. Who on earth, who doesn't have a close friend who's gay, let alone, you know, have people within their wider circle? So I find that really interesting. And I don't know whether that's a deliberate intent. I think that's an outcome of it. But I think the most deliberate intent is that people want to be seen to be good, to be kind, to be progressive, to be ahead of the curve. And now we suddenly realize, oh gosh, so what trans means is that kids identified this really young, these poor people, they had to go through this terrible time when they were in the wrong body. So therefore, what we're actually doing is compassionate. Because I think if you've got your truly homophobic person, I don't know that if someone's truly homophobic, they wouldn't also then be transphobic as well too. You know what I mean? So I think that homophobia is how it impacts. But I really do think that this is largely just driven by naivety. Yeah. And that, again, I come back to that neuroscience, we are hardwired to be part of the group. The most dangerous thing for any human being biologically was for us to be evicted from the group, you know what I mean? And I think that that still runs through us, so that what is seen as these kind of these progressive values are actually the mainstream conservative values. You know, so so people kind of think they're being edgy, but they're not actually being edgy. They're actually being part of the mob. They're making sure they're not sticking their head out. And I really do think that that is what's driving it more. Yeah.
The youth that I speak to, because I've got, you know, teenage children, they seem to be waking up that, you know, they roll their eyes when someone says they're non-binary because it's become a fad. That's why I think they're targeting trans children. I spoke to my GP about this issue the other day, and I said, well, what's the process that happens if a parent comes in with a child, a small child, who says that they're experiencing gender dysphoria and they think they're the wrong sex? And my GP said, I refer them to a gender clinic. Because I'm not equipped to deal with that. And we know that all the gender clinics, all 34 in Victoria, one menopause clinic, 34 gender clinics, every single gender clinic in Victoria has the same model as the Royal Children's Hospital, which is affirm only from the first appointment. So your kid comes home, says, I think I'm trans, or picks it up on the internet, or you are a Munchausen's parent and you think your kid's trans, you go to your local GP and you are straight into the gender clinic after one visit, and it's all affirmation from there.
And this is what's really ironic, because again, there's a whole pile of things, and I think we need to actually really go back to the fact that, and I don't like to use the term gender dysphoria because I don't like that. It's actual body dysphoria. That's what it is. Yeah. It's not gender dysphoria, and this is how they've manipulated the language, etc. It's not transgenderism, it's transsexualism, right? So I think that we have the first mistake was from years ago, again, under this guise of compassion and progressivism. Body dysphoria is a mental health issue.
Mm-hmm.
It is a mental health issue. And as such, it needs intensive therapy, right? Now, people have been lobbying against this for a very long time. And now it's suddenly seen as, no, it's not a body dysphoria. How can we possibly think that someone who's got anorexia is suffering from body dysphoria, but someone who thinks they're in the wrong sex isn't, right? So this whole affirmation model, again, has come about by a lot of very, very aggressive lobbying. And as a result of that, I mean, the psychology profession as a whole has got huge amounts of problems, right? Unfortunately, there's only a very small part of that industry that's evidence-based, and that a lot of it isn't. There's so many different models of operation. And I just think that, as we know, we only need to look at the stats. What are the outcomes? The general outcomes for treatment for addiction is something like 10 to 20% success rate. If we had any other, if you went to a doctor with this general injury or concern and you only had with most things, you only had a 10 to 20% chance of success, we'd be saying, we need to fix up our medical industry. And it's the same with psychology. So, but in this, they've thrown every single fundamental rule about psychotherapy out the window. You never affirm. If someone walks into a therapist and says, look, I think my husband's an arsehole and I want to get divorced, the therapist doesn't go, fantastic, love, here's some divorce lawyers. Let's have a glass of wine and talk about how much of an asshole he is. You know what I mean? No, the therapist needs to go, you're presenting with this. And what's behind this? What's your thoughts? What's your feelings? Do you have irrational? Do you have delusional thoughts and feelings that are contributing to this? Everyone does. Our whole brains are hardwired for storytelling. It is difficult for us to be rational and logical at the best of times. So just as a general, healthy, thriving human being, we're all subject to hijack by those silly little stories that go around in our head, let alone if you've got quite a severe or even minor psychological problem. So the idea that these therapists have thrown every safeguarding out to just say affirmation, when again, they know from their own, if they did the research, that maybe 10% of these kids are going to be genuinely body dysphoric and are still going to stick with that. It just staggers belief to me.
It's their regulatory body that is recommending affirmation only. Like individually, psychologists are going, nah, and they're doing what my GP does. And they're so afraid of these new bills that are accusing them of conversion therapy that they're handballing people to gender clinics. Like it's just this, funneling of vulnerable individuals into gender clinics. Now, I have lived with body dysphoria due to trauma. I was diagnosed when I was 15 years old. And, it took me many, many decades, and I still have episodes now where I cannot look in the mirror. I can't watch these videos. Like I still have episodes where I just can't do it.
Yeah.
But, I live a normal life. I've never had plastic surgery, don't get Botox. It's been really hard. But through intensive psychotherapy and, like positive, doing affirming things for myself and actually, finding value within myself that is not related to the way I look, then I have managed to, largely be unaffected by it. And it is possible, and I would have transitioned as a child because I grew up like most girls in the 70s and 80s as a tomboy. Now, it terrifies me to think that 11-year-old traumatized tomboy me, which I will find a photograph of and put on here one day, would have been put straight on the trans train. And my parents, in their ignorance and in their desire to not have anyone look at them as the source of my trauma, would have welcomed it. They would have gone, oh, you beauty,
Yeah. I mean, and it's absolutely insane, but also to this whole affirmation model where parents can't actually do that. So yes, so when I'm talking about the psychology industry, I'm talking about that represents the industry. Their peak bodies and the ones who are setting these rules and the guidelines are the ones who have set the industry. I mean, it staggers me. I was born in 1966. Years ago, we've already done this. We've already done it's okay. We threw gender roles out way back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The fact that they're coming back in now, as I said, is quite staggering. But it is seriously like a mass delusion. And I think that it's not just trans, it's all of this other, what's been happening under this progressive model, which has undermined people so much that it's come to this head, because it is completely surreal. When would we ever think to take children away from parents? When would we ever think? So we're saying on one hand, a child can't be criminal responsible, they can't go on the pill, they can't do this, but they can decide to physically mutilate their bodies, which will mean that for the rest of their life, they will require intervention from the medical industry. I mean, the progressives generally are screaming against big pharma and all this sort of stuff, and then in the next breath are literally channeling children into them. So
what do you think about pornography's influence? Because it's no coincidence that this whole trans thing and the availability of porn at the click of a finger 24/7 to small children has come at the same time.
Absolutely. And it's not just porn, it's also the growing role of BDSM within porn. You know, like BDSM and this whole, I just think about these messages that are being sent to young girls. It infiltrates. So the BDSM culture isn't just, it's out of the bedroom. You look at all the kind of dance party culture, the burner culture, so many of these things. I mean, wasn't Taylor Swift, I mean, I've never seen any of her music videos in my life, but I remember reading a video once that she had this, in part of one of the videos that she had at her concert. Again, she's decked out in all the BDSM gear, etc. This is all coming across as cool, as groovy, as hip, and this is what it means to be a woman, etc. And so, yeah, I think I think about this, and also then the Me Too movement, and I really do believe that the Me Too movement went way too far. I think when it came to a situation where it was just suddenly believe all women, due process runs out the door, you know, all men are predators, all this sort of stuff. And there was a whole pile of, I just think that got so, it in many ways got so exaggerated. So I feel for these young girls who are getting this message from Me Too, which is women are vulnerable, every man is a predator, you're not safe, you're not safe. It doesn't even matter. If I just quickly run and let my dog out, would that be okay?
That's fine, go for it.
Oh God, sorry, Kate.
Hey, I got this really cool thing. It's a no bark thing. I got it off a Facebook ad and it was $34. And I thought, this thing is not going to work. It's got a guarantee that if it doesn't work. And I used it last night and I didn't hear my dog bark once. It was amazing.
She never barks. She's just decided. I do a lot of, Zoom calls and stuff, and she never barks, but just decided she wanted to bark. Yeah. Okay. So where was it? So then I think about these young girls who are looking at this and kind of going, okay, every man is a predator. Even the most powerful women, multimillionaires, head Hollywood actresses, etc., are also vulnerable to this. And then I look over here and I look at this porn and I just see women completely subjugating themselves, degrading themselves, absolutely incredibly violent, so passive. And again, I'll repeat, violent. Is this what it is to be a woman? You know what I mean? And I can see why they're like, they're opting out of femalehood, out of womanhood. Like we all grew up. I remember reading the feminists from the 50s and 60s talking about that mother-whore dichotomy that girls had to balance. Well, you look how big it is now.
I know.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like before you just had to kind of be sexy and whatever. Now you've not just got to be sexy, you've got to be, this submissive and look amazing and want these men to dominate you. And it's so in everyone's faces. It's just, I don't think we can separate any of these. It's like when pornography is a challenging problem. I'm not a fan of saying we just ban things, but we can't. And this is the problem with critical social justice. It just strips things down into too simplistic things instead of saying this is terribly nuanced. This is terribly nuanced. And let's be real. It's an exploitative industry. That the impact of it. Yes, on one level, we can say that a lot of us, masturbation is real, and a lot of people use pornography in order for masturbation and sexuality and stuff. But we cannot divorce ourselves away from who wants to be that person.
Exactly.
Who wants their daughter to be that person in the video?
Exactly. I've been watching a few YouTube videos by a woman, Isabella, from the US, her channel is Whose Body Is It? And she gets some amazing guests on there. she's recently this year had on a woman from Germany who's talking about, you know, Germany is the brothel of Europe. She's been researching that, and one thing that she said was, you know, when young girls see this kind of pornography, they're scared. They're like, I don't want that to happen to me. So sex becomes this terrifying thing rather than something that can be beautiful and loving. It's just, yeah, it's a terrible time at the moment. But look, we're going to have to wrap things up, Karyn. Just running out of time, but I've got to say you speak so well on the topic. I would love to see you do more television and radio interviews.
But that's certainly the aim, and I really want to start writing and speaking an awful lot more on this subject, because yeah, I just think it's far too important to let it go. And I mean, in terms of pornography and stuff, this has been happening for a long time. I used to do the peak body of the Youth Affairs Council way back in 2004. Dr. Michael Carr-Gregg, one of Australia's leading psychologists, he was talking then about how 15-year-old girls are coming in and saying, I don't know how to give whether my blowjobs are good enough for my boyfriend. You know, all these young girls at that point getting into anal sex and trying to kid themselves that they actually really enjoyed it. No, I'm not to say that anal sex can't be enjoyable, but for most people, it's kind of not, let alone for these young girls. So this has been, and pornography wasn't anywhere as abundant then, and I don't believe the BDSM aspects of it were as severe then as what it is now. You know, I get horrified when you look at some of those things, and we're women, we know what those women are doing, and we can look at that and going, that's just pain, that's just violence, and that's just pain. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, no, thank you for this opportunity, thank you for the work you do. I'd love to chat anymore, anytime you want to chat to me, or again, if you know anyone who would be interested in talking to me, please send them my way. So yeah,
will do. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Karyn. Yeah. I think we might just wrap it up there. So thanks to all our subscribers, and good to chat with you again, Ange, and let's keep in touch, Karyn.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.